On today's show, I will discuss three Mets players who won't break camp at the big league club, but will play a big role for the New York Mets at some point this season.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Last year, the New York Mets got a lot of contributions from Triple-A Syracuse. At the beginning of the year, we saw Mark Vientos, Jose Iglesias, even Reed Garrett started out all of their seasons collectively over in Syracuse. Garrett was the first one up. He was on the Mets roster within the first couple weeks of the season and quickly made an impact. And then as we got towards the middle of May, Mark Vientos started to get some real opportunities. By the end of May, he was the Mets starting third baseman, and Jose Iglesias came up, and we all know how much he impacted the club both on and off the field. So as we look towards the 2025 season, I wanted to spotlight some guys that will begin the year in AAA, but will eventually make their way up. And when they do, guys that can have a profound impact on this team. These are big X factors that can really swing momentum for the Mets at various stages, guys that could be huge contributors that are in featured roles by the time we get all the way through the season and potentially into the playoffs. So we're going to open things up here with a relief pitcher that could very well, if he was completely healthy, start with the big league club. But as I've talked about a lot, Dedniel Nunez is a guy that I think begins this season in Syracuse and probably stays there for a little bit, because I think the Mets are going to really be cautious about this guy because he's coming off that flexor strain injury that was obviously a very scary one for the Mets. They want to make sure this doesn't turn into anything more. They've been on him all off season, keeping hands on him, trying to make sure that he stays healthy. And yet we still haven't seen him pitch in a Grapefruit League game. And I think there is a reason behind that. I think the Mets like having him on the backfield where they can control his environment. They like really playing things cautious. And if you are looking at this guy as someone that can be your eighth inning guy, the question is, when do you get him to that leverage situation? Do you just say, hey, we need him on opening day, and you rush him up? Or do you wait? Because the goal is to have Dedniel Nunez right when it matters most in October. Nunez himself talked about how frustrating it was to see the Mets in these big playoff games and see other guys get put into spots out of that bullpen where Nunez knew if he was healthy, he'd be in the game and he could have made a bigger impact. He talked about how frustrating that was, and I'm sure that frustration was not just reserved for him. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the Mets front office that were thinking, man, if only Dedniel Nunez was part of this bullpen, maybe the Mets could have sneaked in another win in that series against the Dodgers. I don't know if he could have really swung that series, but they definitely would have had a more formidable bullpen that would have been a lot more leak-proof if they had him in place. Because look at what Nunez did last year. 35 games, he pitched to an ERA sub 2.5. It's a 2.31 ERA with a 2.22 FIP. You want to talk about strikeout rate? He struck out 35.6% of the batters that he faced. He got the ball on the ground 53.2% of the time. So those are some pretty good numbers to avoid what you don't want as a reliever, which is home runs. And Dedniel Nunez kept his home run per nine rate under 1, so that is also a really good stat for him. You look at how batters fared against his fastball, a 235 average against, 25.2% whiff rate on the four seam. You look at his slider, batters hit 145 against it. They slugged 232, and they whiffed on the pitch 45.4% of the time. So this is a two-pitch pitcher that's going to throw that slider just as much as that fastball. Last year, he threw the slider slightly more than his fastball, but two really great pitches that will allow him to be a really effective late inning guy for the Mets for years to come, but they have to get him built up the right way. So Dedniel Nunez, I think he's going to start the year in Syracuse, whether that is with an injury designation or they just option him down because he does have the options. And then I think you're going to see him, as I've talked about on this show a lot, getting an appearance once every 3 days and just keeping him on that consistent schedule in Syracuse. They play 6 games a week. He's going to pitch twice a week. Maybe he's going to pitch for the Tuesday game, and then you give him Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So have a pitch on the Tuesday game and the Saturday game, and then he gets Sunday, Monday off, and it goes at it again on a Tuesday. So he gets at least 2 days off between each appearance. I think that's what you could see, certainly, with Dedniel Nunez, where, again, you really put him in bubble wrap, and eventually you get to a point where you say, all right, let's try him on 1 day rest. Let's try him pitching back-to-backs. And once he proves that he can handle that level of a workload without any strain and he's not recovering poorly, then you might go to him. Or just whenever you get to a point where you need a reliever, he's obviously a guy you can call on, and he could be a huge piece. He could honestly be your most effective reliever this year, but it's not going to happen right away. I feel pretty strongly about this, that the Mets are going to wait, and ideally that waiting pays off on the back end, and you have Dedniel Nunez strong come October, because if you do have Nunez and you have AJ Minter and you have Edwin Diaz, that's a great top 3. And Reed Garrett can obviously help out Ryan Stanek. You have other options. But if we're talking about the pitchers that I think have the best stuff, the guys that are made for those high leverage spots, particularly in October, it's Diaz, Nunez, and Minter. And I just can't state enough how important Nunez is to what the Mets are going to try to do with their bullpen this year. And for this whole thing to work out the way the Mets are hoping, it makes sense to just be very, very cautious, so that once you get into June, Dedniel Nunez is able to pitch back-to-backs. He's a big part of your bullpen, and maybe he can carry things over and end up giving you a good amount of innings and being ready to pitch when the moment calls on him in October. He's definitely an X factor for this team, and one that we're not going to see to start the year, at least I don't believe. Now, AJ Minter is another one, sort of a footnote, just because I think there's still a chance that he breaks camp. He did pitch today in the Grapefruit League on Wednesday, and he came in for the 5th inning after Paul Blackburn threw 4 perfect innings. So really good start for Blackburn. Minter came in the 5th, had a 1-2-3 inning with a strikeout, only needed 10 pitches. He said he typically would get 10 outings in spring before the season started, and that includes lives. And so far, he's thrown 2 or 3 live sessions. So now you're up to maybe 3 or 4 appearances. It's a little bit of a rush to get Minter good to go for opening day. He's going to pitch again on Saturday, but I would assume he also starts the year on the injured list. I just think he's going to be back as soon as that designation ends. If it's a 15-day IL stint, as soon as he clears those 15 days, I expect AJ Minter to rejoin this bullpen fully stretched out and ready to be the 8th inning guy for Edwin Diaz and be that guy the entire season. I have a lot more confidence in AJ Minter being healthy, but Dedniel Nunez is this X factor that could take the Mets and completely change the outlook for their bullpen. He is that effective. He is that nasty. So we'll see how long he is in Syracuse and how he can actually manage to stay healthy as he tries to really put it all together and prove that he can be a dependable big league lights out reliever. So we'll see what happens with Nunez. In the next segment, we're going to talk about another young player that's going to start the year in Syracuse who could have a big, big impact. It's the top prospect in this system. We're talking Brandon Sproat next. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all the money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO giving you a full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers by opening day. Getting really close, but we are still less than 500 away from getting to that goal. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. So let's talk a little bit about Brandon Sproat. He is the Mets' top pitching prospect and actually just their top prospect overall, depending on the outlet that you ask. I know personally, I had Brandon Sproat as number one, just above Jet Williams, who is the number two prospect on this list, and a guy that we certainly could have talked about, and we'll touch on him a little bit in the final segment today. So we'll get into some infielders that will start the year at Triple-A. But to continue on the pitching front, Brandon Sproat can be a huge part of this team this year. And it's just a matter of when that happens, not if for me. I mean, you're looking at a guy that just has to prove that he can pitch at the highest level of the minor leagues in Triple-A, because that's the one thing that he did not do last year. Once he shows that, the Mets are going to have to be looking for reasons to keep him out of the rotation, because once he really illustrates to the Mets and to their top brass that he is ready to go, it's going to be very enticing to pull that cord and plug him into the rotation. But it really depends on how everyone else is pitching. And again, it comes down to him showing that he is good to go. It's a combination of him proving that he's ready by how well he does in Triple-A, but also, an opportunity in the big league rotation could necessitate the promotion as well, where he's just your best option sitting in Triple-A. Last year, Christian Scott made 5 starts in Triple-A, pitched with 3.20 ERA. The Mets rotation wasn't doing too great at that point. They were looking for a jolt. Early on in May, Christian Scott gets the call, makes that start on May 4th. And at that point, it was really being sold that, Christian Scott's going to be a big part of this team. He makes 4 starts, did a pretty good job, but ultimately the Mets, when David Peterson was good to go and returned to the rotation, they tried out a 5-man group instead of the 6-man rotation because they wanted to add an extra arm into their bullpen. Funny enough, Dedniel Nunez was sort of the accompanying move of sending Christian Scott down. It worked for the Mets. And then by the time that they might have even thought to call on Christian Scott, he ends up getting hurt, and that ends up being a point that never really came back around as far as when we would see him again and what type of a role the Mets were going to expect out of Christian Scott down the stretch. But I think if you go back and remember what was said when Scott was sent down after the initial promotion, it was always, all right, we're going to send him down for a little bit, but not, he's done pitching in the big leagues this year. If Christian Scott was healthy, I am sure he would have played some type of a role down the stretch for the Mets. So that brings us back to Sproat. If you look at where he's at right now, when it comes to starts in the upper minor leagues, he's actually lined up exactly with where Christian Scott was when he got the call last year, because Christian Scott in 2023, he had made 6 starts in high A, pitched to a 2.28 ERA, got promoted to Double-A, made 12 starts, pitched to a 2.47 ERA. He had thrown 87 and 2/3 innings. But again, 12 starts in Double-A, had not pitched in Triple-A yet. Started off 2024 in Triple-A, made those 5 starts. So when you put together the 12 Double-A starts in 2023, the 5 Triple-A starts in 2024, he had made 17 starts in the upper levels in the minors before he got that call. For Sproat, last year, he made 6 appearances in high A, pitched to a 1.07 ERA. 11 starts in Double-A, pitched to a 2.45. Then he got up to Triple-A, made 7 starts, pitched to an ERA over 7. But the point is, You combine his Double-A starts and his 7 Triple-A starts. He made 18 starts in the upper levels in the minor leagues last year. The only difference between him and Christian Scott is Christian Scott thrived at each step along the way. Brandon Sproat did struggle down the stretch last year, but if he shakes that off, starts this year great, makes 5 outstanding starts, and the Mets are not getting the production they expected of one of their 5 or 6 starters, Brandon Sproat can be up in a hurry. And I think it's really a matter of just finding what pocket of the season it makes the most sense to have him part of your big league rotation, because I don't necessarily expect him as a rookie to be inserted into the rotation in the middle of May and hold a spot all the way through October. That is asking a ton out of a kid that last year threw 116 and a third innings, but has never quite gotten to the levels that you need to as a starting pitcher in the big leagues, where we're talking, past 150 innings and beyond. So I don't expect the Mets to see that type of a crazy jump. At most, I would say 140 innings, which would still be a sizable jump from last year, not quite 25 innings. So it's just knowing that he's probably not going to be able to pitch the entire marathon. When will the sprints come with Brandon Sproat where he can make the biggest of impacts? It could be early in the season. And I think he'll prove that he is ready for that opportunity in the minor leagues. And if he does get that shot, I wouldn't expect him to look back, and he's going to make it tough for the Mets to take that ball out of his hand. But I look at the impact of Brandon Sproat, and I think it's going to be reserved to a month or two where he's just needed and really thrives. And beyond him, you have other pitching prospects that can make an impact this year. Blade Tidwell, Nolan McLean, Jonah Tong are the three. Tidwell, I still don't know if he's going to be able to round out his arsenal and prove to be a starting pitcher in the big leagues. But they could go the other way and say, all right, we're just going to focus on four-seam slider and use that two-pitch mix and call him up, and he could be an absolute weapon out of the bullpen. Same goes to Nolan McLean. He gets so much sweep on his breaking pitches with the amount of spin that he generates. He's another fun guy that'd be fun to just play with, even outside of the starting rotation, as just a potential high impact arm that could enter the mix. So the Mets have a lot of pitching that could move the needle this year. On the relief front, Dedniel Nunez is again the guy that could be a huge X factor pitching for that bullpen. And I think the same thing can be said about Brandon Sproat here. It's your top prospect for a reason, and he is so close that it's hard to expect that he'll just go through this year without getting that opportunity. At some point, when he does get it, I'm expecting a month or two of really great performances by Brandon Sproat that will pay huge dividends at the end of the season when we're looking at the standings in the National League East. Having Brandon Sproat making that impact, it could be the difference potentially. So really excited to see what happened there. Final segment, we're going to talk about some infielders that could make a huge impact, and particularly focus on one that really most moves the needle as an X factor for this team. We'll go through in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. If you're looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious, crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. If you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing I'm holding up a bag of the smoky barbecue. I've been telling you all about honey roasted as my favorite flavor. I had yet to try the smoky barbecue, and I tried today. Gotta tell you, might be a new favorite for me. If you like, barbecue potato chips, think that, but pistachios, and such a really great snack. And it's one of the highest protein nuts. So each 1 ounce serving of Wonderful Pistachios has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value, which is really helping you stay fuller longer, especially with it being packed with fibers and better for you unsaturated fats. I personally love the no shells variety, whether it is the honey roasted or the smoky barbecue. They also have a chili roasted. I'm eager to try all of those non-shells varieties, which are so good. It makes the perfect grab and go snack. But if you are interested in cracking open every nut for the satisfying crunch, the install options are a classic favorite that is available. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein. Get snacking and cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. If you're an everyday listener of the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. So let's talk about the infield mix. And right now, Brett Baty and Luis Acuna are competing for that final bench spot. One of them will get it. The other one will go down to Syracuse, and they could very well be up at any time there's an injury. Or who knows, if Brandon Nimmo starts the season on the IL, the Mets might decide to roster both Brett Baty and Luis Acuna. So ultimately, those are not the guys we're talking about today. Although whoever does go down will certainly fit the billing of a guy that's starting the season in Triple-A. That'll have a big impact. But the guy that is a little bit forgotten all of a sudden is Ronnie Mauricio, because Ronnie Mauricio has not gotten back on the field in the game yet, and hopefully that does come at some point this spring. But remember, this was a top prospect that we were really thrilled about at the end of the 2023 season, who got some run in September, and he was going to play a big role in 2024. Didn't happen because he tore his ACL in the Dominican Winter League. Now he is, 16 months removed from that injury, and he is ready to restart his MLB career here. And the last we saw of him, he hit 292 in Triple-A, got on base through 346 clip, slugged at a 506 clip. That's an 852 OPS at 23 home runs and 24 stolen bases in 116 games. So if you think about the totals of home runs and stolen bases in that many games, the best possible outcome for what Ronnie Mauricio could become is a guy that can play 160 games in a season and hit 30 home runs and maybe steal 30 bases on top of it. That is obviously the best possible outcome, but it just shows you the amount of talent that he has that's even on the table. He's such a good athlete. The problem has always been his approach at the plate. The chase has always been high. In the past, that did lead to more elevated strikeout rates. He has cut the strikeout rates, but he's a guy that really does put bat to ball a lot. Doesn't always hit the ball with authority, depending on his approach. So as we're looking at Ronnie Mauricio, that's what he has to figure out. I'd also stick him at third base nearly every day in AAA, just because he's a natural shortstop. And if he has to play that position, that can come. He will be able to play second base too. We saw that in 2023. I want to have him getting a bunch of reps at third base as your contingency plan for Mark Vientos and or Brett Baty not working out. Ronnie Mauricio is a switch hitter. He's 6'3". Being able to call an athlete like that when a Vientos goes down or a Baty goes down or Jeff McNeil goes down or someone in the outfield goes down and McNeil has to shift out there. So you have a vacancy at second base. Ronnie Mauricio is a really exciting option that you can call on. Maybe not the high floor that Luis Acuna provides as such a great defender at every position, but a guy that could get there, certainly could get to above average defense potentially in the infield, wherever they put him. But even if it is more league average, he provides a level of pop that is very enticing coming off the end of your bench, where a guy can step into the lineup and have a huge impact offensively. I mean, he still has that in him. So I am really curious to see when Ronnie Mauricio gets his opportunity. But there's every chance he can run with it, just like we saw Vientos last year, and force himself into the Mets' plans moving forward. Otherwise, there's also the world where the Mets could trade a Ronnie Mauricio. They could trade a Brandon Sproat. They could trade a Luis Acuna, depending on what the big league roster needs and what position they're at in the middle of the year. So it's going to be really fun to watch that next wave that's coming and impacting the big league roster. But don't think that the Mets have to force any of these guys onto the roster at any time. They'll pick and choose their spots. They will fill out the 40, the best they can, and they will use it to supplement the active roster however they see fit. But it's got to make sense for a player's development and for the team. And so those two things haven't aligned yet for these three players, and Nunez, Mauricio, and Sproat. Potentially could be, again, Luis and Acuna or others. But once you get into this season, I really look at those three guys as huge X factors that can turn the season at a certain point. I mean, we saw Vientos do it last year. I think Mauricio, if everything is right, and I was not as high and haven't been as high on Mauricio as I always was on Vientos, but doesn't mean that he can't make that big impact. And certainly the same goes with a guy with frontline potential in Brandon Sproat, and a guy that can be a perfect bridge to Edwin Diaz and Dedniel Nunez. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's show. I am actually going to be heading to Port St. Lucie today. Still haven't gotten tickets yet. The prices are crazy, but I'm going to go over to Game Time, get my last minute tickets, and I'll find my way into the ballpark with my dad. If any of you are at the park as well, feel free to hit me up on social media. If you're locked on Mets Insider, send a text there. If not, if you're on social, do me a favor and you can reach out and I can see if I can link up with any of you. But I am looking forward to catching a little bit of Mets spring training action, and I'll be talking about whatever I see on tomorrow's edition of the show. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day or your first watch. And for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports today with our local host from each team, league-wise from each league. Find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.